Hello there, and welcome back to the Sleepy Nova Chronicles. 4 billion years ago, it rained for the first time. Not a shower. Not a passing storm that cleared by afternoon and left the ground smelling of wet earth and the sky washed clean and blue. The first rain on Earth fell continuously, without pause, without interruption, for somewhere between 10,000 and 1 million years. The best estimate, the number that detectives looking at the oldest rocks on the planet have converged on after decades of careful reading of ancient chemistry, is that the first sustained rainfall lasted approximately 40,000 years. 40,000 years of rain, falling on a surface that had never been rained on before, on rock that had never been wet, into basins that had never held water, building the oceans from nothing, one raindrop at a time. The sound of it would have been unlike anything that exists today. There was no soil to absorb the impact. No vegetation to break the fall of the drops before they hit the ground. No leaf canopy to filter the rain into a gentle drip. Just water falling directly onto bare volcanic rock, at whatever speed physics allowed, across the entire surface of a planet that was still cooling from its formation, the rain itself partly responsible for the cooling, each drop absorbing heat from the surface and carrying it into the ocean it was building, the ocean growing warmer as the rain fell into it, the warmth evaporating more water back into the atmosphere condensing it back into cloud, the cloud releasing it again as rain. The first water cycle, running at full speed, on a planet with no life to witness it, no ear to hear the rain falling on rock that had never been rained on. No eye to see the first rivers carving the first channels into the first landscape. Just physics. Just the patient, impersonal, unstoppable logic of water moving from where it was warm to where it was cold, from where it was vapor to where it was liquid, from where it was liquid to where it was rain, falling, always falling, building the world that everything else would eventually depend on. You are here tonight because that rain fell. Not metaphorically. Causally. The oceans that the first rain built became the medium in which the first life evolved. The water cycle that the first rain established became the mechanism that distributed fresh water across the land surface of the planet, making every terrestrial ecosystem possible. The chemistry that the first rain initiated, the dissolving of minerals from rock, the acidification of the early ocean, the gradual weathering of the continental surface, set in motion a geological process that is still running tonight, above your roof, in the dark, in the clouds that are releasing their water onto whatever landscape sits above wherever you are lying still. The rain falling tonight is the same rain, the same water, the same cycle, 40,000 years older than the first rain that built the oceans, and still running, still patient, still doing exactly what it has always done. Rain is not what you think it is. This is the first thing to understand, and it is also the first misconception to release tonight. Gently, the way you release the last thought before sleep, without resistance, without replacement. The image most people carry of rain is simple. Water falls from cloud. Water hits ground. The water came from somewhere wet, went through a cloud, and arrived at your umbrella. The cycle is understood in outline. The mechanism is assumed to be straightforward. It is not straightforward. Rain is one of the most complex physical and chemical processes that occurs routinely on the surface of this planet. The journey of a single water molecule from ocean surface to raindrop to ground involves phase transitions, aerodynamic forces, electrical charges, biological interactions, chemical reactions, and atmospheric physics operating simultaneously across scales that range from the molecular to the continental. A raindrop, by the time it reaches your skin, has been through more transformations than most people complete in a lifetime. It has been vapor and droplet and ice crystal and droplet again. It has collided with thousands of other droplets. It has been carried horizontally for hundreds of kilometers by wind before descending vertically through the final kilometers to the ground. It has changed shape continuously during its descent, wobbling and flattening and wobbling again, its surface tension fighting the aerodynamic forces pressing against it from below. and it carries, inside its chemistry, a record of everything it passed through. Detectives looking at the chemical composition of individual raindrops revealed that a raindrop is not pure water. It is a dilute solution, a weak acid, in fact, even before industrial pollution is considered, because carbon dioxide in the atmosphere dissolves into the falling drop and forms carbonic acid, giving clean, unpolluted rain a pH of approximately 5.6. Slightly acidic. Not harmful. In fact, essential, because that mild acidity is one of the primary mechanisms by which rain dissolves minerals from rock, releasing the calcium and magnesium and potassium and phosphorus that plants need to grow, that animals need to build their bones, that you need to think and move and breathe. The rain is acidic enough to dissolve rock. Slowly, patiently, over geological time. But it dissolves it. The calcium in your bones was freed from rock by rain. The rain fell on a mountain. It dissolved the calcium from the limestone or the basalt. It carried it dissolved in solution to a river. The river carried it to the ocean. Marine organisms incorporated it into their shells. The shells accumulated on the seafloor and were compressed into limestone. Tectonic forces eventually uplifted that limestone into a new mountain. Rain fell on the new mountain and dissolved the calcium again. This cycle, the calcium cycle, has been running for billions of years, and it is the reason calcium exists in a form that living things can use. Rain made your bones possible. You are, in a measurable chemical sense, the product of rain. Not just water. Rain specifically, with its acidity, its mineral load, its capacity to dissolve and carry and deposit. Rain as a chemical process, not just a weather event. The distinction matters because it changes what rain is. Rain is not the sky emptying itself. Rain is the sky doing chemistry. It is the atmosphere processing the minerals of the planet's surface, carrying them from where they are concentrated in rock to where they are needed by life, dissolving and transporting and depositing in a cycle so fundamental to the existence of terrestrial biology that without it, without the slightly acidic, mineral-carrying, rock-dissolving rain, there would be no soil, no plant, no animal, no anything that breathes air and drinks water and lies still in the dark and listens to rain falling on a roof and feels, without quite knowing why, that everything is going to be all right. That feeling, the specific calm that rain produces in most people, is not accidental. It is not simply aesthetic preference. Detectives looking at the neurological response to rain sounds revealed that the human brain processes the sound of rain as a non-threatening auditory stimulus, a sound that the nervous system has learned, across hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution and millions of years of primate evolution before that, to associate with shelter and safety and the abundance of fresh water. Rain on a roof means you are inside. Rain in the trees means the forest is alive and the drought has broken. Rain on still water means the world is doing what it is supposed to do. Your nervous system hears rain and relaxes, not because you decide to relax, because the sound itself carries, encoded in its randomness and its rhythm and its white noise quality, a signal that your deepest biology interprets as safety, as abundance, as the world working correctly. The sound of rain is, in neurological terms, one of the oldest and most reliable safety signals the human nervous system knows. It predates language. It predates culture. It predates the species itself, because the primate ancestors of humans were responding to rain sounds as a safety signal long before Homo sapiens existed to have an opinion about it. You were built to find rain calming. The rain built you, and then it gave you the sound of itself as a gift, a sound that the nervous system you developed over millions of years of evolution would hear and interpret, automatically, below the level of conscious thought, as permission to rest. Tonight we are going to follow the rain. From the ocean surface where it begins as vapor, through the atmosphere where it becomes cloud and ice crystal and droplet, through the descent where aerodynamic forces shape it into its wobbling, flattening, hamburger bun form, through the impact where it strikes the ground and begins the chemical work of dissolving the world, through the river where it carries its mineral load toward the ocean, and finally to the place where it arrives in you, in your cells, in your blood, in the water that makes up 60% of your body weight and makes possible every thought you are having right now, including the thought that you are finally, at the end of a long day, ready to stop thinking. This is rain, not the word, not the weather event. The full, ancient, chemically complex, neurologically significant, 4-billion-year-old process that built the world you live in and the body you live in and the nervous system that is, right now, interpreting the idea of rain as a signal to soften. If this kind of quiet journey is useful to you, a slow hour of science and deep time and the specific calm of understanding something enormous and ancient and patient, then I would gently invite you to subscribe or to leave a thought below about whichever part of this stays with you. It helps other people who are lying in their own darkness, also trying to let the day dissolve, find their way here. One raindrop at a time. But for now, there is nothing you need to do except this. Allow your shoulders to soften. Let your breathing slow, not forced, not adjusted, just allowed to find its own depth, its own rhythm, its own pace. Let the weight of your body settle into whatever is beneath you, the way rain settles into soil, not resisting, not pooling at the surface, just absorbing slowly downward into something that receives it without effort. The rain has been falling for 4 billion years. It knows what it is doing. Let's begin. A raindrop is not born. It is built. The distinction matters more than it might seem at first, lying still in the dark with the day finally beginning to release its grip on you. Something that is born arrives whole, complete from the moment of its existence, requiring only time and conditions to develop into what it will become. Something that is built is assembled, piece by piece, component added to component, each addition changing the structure, each change making the next addition possible, the whole thing emerging not from a single moment of creation but from a process of continuous accumulation that could, at any point along the way, have stopped and produced something smaller, something that never reached the ground. Most raindrops never reach the ground. This is the first fact about rain that reconfigures everything else. The clouds above you tonight contain an almost incalculable number of water droplets, tiny spheres of liquid water between 5 and 20 micrometers across, suspended in the air by updrafts, colliding with each other, merging and separating, growing and shrinking as the conditions inside the cloud shift. The vast majority of those droplets will never become rain. They will evaporate back into vapor as the cloud dissipates. They will be carried horizontally by wind to a different location and evaporate there. They will merge with other droplets and grow briefly larger and then break apart again, shedding smaller droplets that are carried back upward by the updraft before they can descend. Only the ones that grow large enough, fast enough, in the right part of the cloud, with the right updraft conditions, will make it out. Rain is the exception, not the rule. To become a raindrop, to grow from a cloud droplet 5 micrometers across to a raindrop 2 millimeters across large enough to fall against the updraft and reach the ground, a water droplet must increase its volume by approximately 1 million times. 1 million. If you started with a sphere the size of a grain of fine sand and needed to increase its volume by 1 million times, you would end up with a sphere roughly the size of a large beach ball. That is the scale of growth a cloud droplet must achieve to become rain. And it must achieve it inside a cloud, against updrafts, through the mechanism of collision alone, by running into other droplets, merging with them, growing larger, running into larger droplets, merging again, growing larger still, in a cascade of collisions that accelerates as the droplet grows because larger droplets fall faster through the cloud than smaller ones, sweeping through the smaller droplets below them like a slow, wet avalanche gathering everything in its path. This process is called collision coalescence, and it is, in its way, one of the most elegant mechanical processes in the natural world. A self-amplifying system in which the very growth that results from each collision makes the next collision more likely and more productive. A droplet that has doubled in size falls twice as fast through the cloud below it, intercepting twice as many smaller droplets per unit of time, each interception adding more mass, each mass addition increasing the fall speed further, the cascade continuing until either the droplet grows large enough to escape the cloud base and begin its descent to the ground, or it grows so large that the aerodynamic forces acting on it during its fall tear it apart into smaller droplets that begin the process again. The monster of rain physics is not the storm. It is this, the collision cascade. The self-amplifying mechanism that takes a droplet 1/50th the width of a human hair and builds it, through millions of individual collisions in the dark interior of a cloud, into something heavy enough to fall through kilometers of atmosphere and arrive at your skin with enough force to leave a momentary impression. Detectives looking at the internal dynamics of rain-producing clouds using high-resolution radar and instrumented research aircraft revealed that the collision coalescence process, while elegant in principle, is chaotic in practice. Inside a cloud, droplets do not fall in neat vertical lines. They are carried sideways by turbulence. They are lifted by updrafts and dropped by downdrafts. They collide at angles. They merge incompletely, two droplets touching, partially merging, then separating again, each carrying away a fragment of the other. They oscillate as they grow, their surfaces rippling with the vibration of recent collisions, their shapes shifting between sphere and oblate ellipsoid as surface tension and aerodynamic forces compete for control of their geometry. A cloud in the process of producing rain is not a quiet place. It is turbulent in a way that would be terrifying if you could be inside it at human scale. A churning, dark, electrically charged environment in which wind speeds change direction and magnitude over distances of meters, in which water exists simultaneously as vapor and liquid and ice, in which the pressure and temperature are shifting continuously in response to the movement of air masses that span hundreds of kilometers. Inside a cumulonimbus cloud, the towering storm cloud capable of producing the heaviest rainfall, updraft speeds reach 270 kilometers per hour in the cloud's core, faster than a Formula One car. Vertical. Inside a column of condensing water vapor. The rain that falls gently on your roof tonight was, hours ago, being hurled upward at Formula One speed inside a column of air so turbulent that a human being caught inside it would be destroyed in seconds. And then it fell. The descent of a raindrop from cloud base to ground is governed by a balance between two forces that are always in competition and never quite in equilibrium. Gravity pulls the drop downward with a force proportional to its mass. Air resistance pushes against it from below with a force proportional to its speed and its cross-sectional area. As the drop accelerates downward under gravity, the air resistance increases until it exactly matches the gravitational force, at which point the drop stops accelerating and falls at a constant speed called terminal velocity. Terminal velocity for a raindrop depends on its size. A small raindrop, 1 millimeter in diameter, roughly the size of a small ball bearing, falls at approximately 4 meters per second. A large raindrop, 5 millimeters in diameter, roughly the size of a small pea, falls at approximately 9 meters per second. 9 meters per second is approximately 32 kilometers per hour, the speed of a brisk cycling pace. A raindrop the size of a small pea strikes the ground at the speed of a bicycle moving at 32 kilometers per hour. You have stood in rain moving at that speed against your skin and called it heavy. It is heavy. The impact force of a large raindrop striking a surface is approximately 100 times its own weight. The aerodynamic amplification of its terminal velocity converted into impact pressure at the moment of contact. 100 times its own weight. If you fell from a height and hit the ground with 100 times your own body weight in impact force, the result would be catastrophic. The raindrop achieves this impact force and then simply splashes, its surface tension overwhelmed in an instant, the sphere detonating into a corona of smaller droplets that fly outward from the impact point at speeds exceeding 10 meters per second, carrying soil particles with them, beginning the erosion of whatever surface they struck. This is what rain does to bare soil. 2,000 drops per square meter per minute during a moderate rainfall event, each one detonating on impact, each one ejecting soil particles outward in a corona of splashed droplets. each one contributing to the slow, patient, relentless process of moving the land surface from higher ground to lower ground that has been reshaping the continents since the first rain fell on the cooling surface of the early Earth. The gentlest weather carries the most ancient violence inside it. But the size of a single raindrop, even the largest, most energetic, most aerodynamically extreme raindrop that the atmosphere produces, is not where the true scale of rain reveals itself. The true scale reveals itself when you step back from the individual drop and look at what rain is doing all at once, across the entire planet, at this moment. Detectives looking at global rainfall data using satellite measurements and ground-based rain gauge networks revealed that the Earth receives approximately 505,000 cubic kilometers of rainfall per year. 505,000 cubic kilometers. Every year. Consistently. Driven by the same solar energy that evaporated the water from the ocean surface in the first place, approximately 170 watts of solar power per square meter of ocean surface, converted into the latent heat of evaporation, carried upward in water vapor, released when the vapor condenses into cloud droplets, driving the atmospheric circulation that eventually returns the water to the surface as rain. 505,000 cubic kilometers. To hold that number in your body rather than just your head, imagine filling a cube with sides approximately 80 kilometers long. 80 kilometers in every direction, filled completely with water. That is approximately the volume of rain that falls on the surface of the Earth every year. It falls on oceans and continents alike, on rainforests and deserts, on cities and open ocean, on mountain peaks and valley floors, on every surface the atmosphere can reach, in amounts that vary from less than 1 millimeter per year in the driest deserts to more than 12,000 millimeters per year in the wettest places on the planet. The wettest place on Earth is a location called Mawsynram, in the Meghalaya state of northeast India, which receives an average annual rainfall of approximately 11,872 millimeters. Nearly 12 meters of rain per year. Every year. Consistently. That is the height of a 3-story building, in rain, falling on a single location in a single year. The people who live there, and people do live there, have lived there for generations, have built their culture and their architecture around the extraordinary rainfall, use living root bridges. Bridges grown from the aerial roots of rubber fig trees, trained across rivers over decades until the roots have thickened and hardened into structures strong enough to walk across, designed specifically to withstand the force of water that a rainfall of 12 meters per year produces in the rivers below. Bridges grown from trees. Because the rain demanded it. Your body contains approximately 42 liters of water, the average for an adult human being of average size. 42 liters. The volume of a large kitchen bin, filled to the top. That water is distributed through every system in your body. In your blood, where it carries dissolved oxygen and nutrients and waste products between your organs. In your cells, where it provides the medium in which every biochemical reaction in your body occurs. In your joints, where it cushions the contact between bone surfaces. In your eyes, where it maintains the pressure and clarity of the lens. In your brain, where it makes up approximately 73% of the tissue weight and provides the fluid in which your neurons fire their signals to each other. 73% of your brain is water. The thoughts you are having right now, the slow, softening thoughts of someone who is approaching sleep, whose nervous system is beginning to down-regulate, whose breathing has already slowed slightly from where it was when this began, those thoughts are being conducted through tissue that is nearly 3/4 water. The electrical signals carrying those thoughts are moving through ion channels that depend on the presence of water to function. The neurotransmitters carrying information between your neurons are dissolved in water. The entire architecture of your consciousness is suspended in, and dependent on, water that arrived in you as food and drink and absorbed moisture, water that was, at some point in its recent history, rain. You are thinking with rain. The water in your brain tonight fell from a cloud at some point in the last few weeks or months. It was carried in vapor from an ocean surface. It condensed around a particle of dust or sea salt. It grew through collision coalescence from a cloud droplet 1/50th the width of a human hair, into a raindrop large enough to fall against the updraft and descend through kilometers of atmosphere to the ground. It hit the ground at 32 kilometers per hour and detonated on impact and soaked into the soil and was taken up by a plant root and entered the food chain and arrived, eventually, in the food or drink that became part of you. That raindrop is now thinking. Detectives looking at the electrical properties of rain revealed something that connects the physics of the falling drop to the physics of the brain in a way that feels almost too precise to be coincidental, though it is simply physics operating at different scales. Falling raindrops carry electrical charge. The friction between the drop and the air it falls through generates a small static charge on the drop's surface. In a thunderstorm, the separation of positive and negative charges between the upper and lower parts of the cloud, driven by the collision of ice crystals and water droplets in the turbulent cloud interior, builds an electrical potential difference of hundreds of millions of volts between the cloud base and the ground below. Hundreds of millions of volts. The electrical potential difference across the membrane of a single neuron in your brain, the voltage that drives the firing of a nerve signal, is approximately 70 millivolts. 70 thousandths of a volt. The thunderstorm above you operates at a voltage approximately 10 billion times greater than the signal in a single neuron. And yet both are electrical. Both are driven by charge separation across a boundary. Both discharge when the potential difference becomes large enough. Both produce, at the moment of discharge, a signal that propagates outward and triggers responses in the system around them. The thunderstorm and your brain are running the same physics, at scales so different that the comparison seems absurd. And yet the mechanism, charge separation, potential difference, discharge, propagation, is identical. The lightning bolt and the nerve signal are cousins, separated by 10 billion in scale, united by the same fundamental electrical physics of moving charge through a medium. The rain that built your brain runs the same electricity as the storm. This is the titan of rain science. Not the raindrop you can see and feel. The invisible electrical architecture that connects the physics of falling water to the physics of the nervous system that is, right now, processing these words and finding them, perhaps, a reason to let the day go. The storm outside and the storm inside, both electrical, both running on water, both quieting as the conditions that produce them gradually shift, and the energy dissipates, and the charge returns to equilibrium, and the air clears, and the rain slows, and the night becomes, gradually, still. The rain is already slowing somewhere. It always does. The storm builds to its peak, and then the conditions that sustained it begin to change. The updraft weakens, the supply of warm moist air is exhausted, the electrical charge dissipates, and the rain eases. Not because it was defeated, because it completed its work, because the water it was carrying has been delivered, because the cycle has moved to its next phase, and the ground receives it, absorbs it, carries it downward through the soil to the water table, or downslope in surface runoff to the nearest stream, or upward through plant roots to the leaves that will transpire it back into the atmosphere tomorrow morning, when the sun returns and the evaporation begins again and the whole ancient process starts its next cycle. The rain does its work, and then it becomes something else, as it always has, as it always will. Before the rain arrives, the ground knows it is coming, not through any mystical sensitivity, not through anything that requires an explanation beyond chemistry. The soil knows rain is coming because the air above it changes. The humidity rises. The barometric pressure drops. The wind shifts direction. And the organisms living in the top layer of the soil, the bacteria and fungi and microscopic animals packed into every cubic centimeter of healthy ground in numbers that exceed the human population of the Earth, respond to those changes before the first drop falls. They begin to prepare. They begin to activate. They begin, in the language of microbiology, to wake up. The rain has not arrived yet, but the soil is already answering it. This is the first thing that changes when you understand rain as a biological event rather than a weather event. Rain is not something that happens to the living world. Rain is something the living world has been in conversation with for 4 billion years. A conversation so old and so continuous that the organisms involved have evolved specific responses to its approach, its arrival, its chemistry, and its departure. The soil does not simply receive rain. It participates in rain. It has been participating in rain since before there were plants to drink it or animals to shelter from it, or any surface feature more complex than bare rock and the thin microbial films that first colonized that rock. The living world and the rain grew up together. And the most intimate record of that relationship, the most direct evidence that biology and rain have been in conversation for longer than complex life has existed, arrives in a smell. You know this smell. You have known it your entire life, and almost certainly before you had a word for it. The smell of rain approaching on a dry day. The smell that arrives before the first drop falls, carried on the wind that precedes the storm, rising from the dry ground as humidity penetrates the top layer of soil and begins to disturb whatever has been sitting there in the heat, waiting. A smell that is simultaneously earthy and clean, dark and fresh, ancient and immediate. A smell that most people, when they encounter it, feel in their chest before they process it in their mind. A smell that produces, reliably and across cultures and across the entire span of human history, a response that is closer to recognition than to mere sensation. That smell has a name. It is called petrichor, from the Greek petra, stone, and ichor, the fluid that flows through the veins of the gods in Greek mythology. Stone blood. The word was coined in 1964 by two Australian researchers, Isabel Baer and Roderick Thomas, who spent years investigating the chemistry of the smell that rises from dry ground before rain, and who identified, in the oils that accumulate on rock and soil surfaces during dry periods, the specific molecules responsible for the sensation. But petrichor is not one smell. It is a layered signal, a blend of multiple chemical compounds, each one carrying a different piece of information about the soil and the rain and the relationship between them. The most important of these compounds is called geosmin. It is produced by bacteria, specifically by a group called actinomycetes, which live in soil worldwide and produce geosmin as a metabolic byproduct that accumulates in the soil during dry periods and is released into the air when rain disturbs the surface. Geosmin is among the most detectable molecules that exist. The human nose can detect geosmin at concentrations as low as 5 parts per trillion. 5 molecules of geosmin for every trillion molecules of air. 5 parts per trillion is a concentration so vanishingly small that describing it in everyday terms requires a comparison that strains credulity. If you dissolved a single drop of geosmin, one drop, the volume of a large raindrop, into an Olympic swimming pool, then dissolve that swimming pool's water into every swimming pool in the world simultaneously, the resulting concentration would still be detectable by the human nose. Your nose can smell a single drop of a chemical dissolved into every swimming pool on Earth. Detectives looking at why human beings evolved such extraordinary sensitivity to geosmin revealed something that connects the smell of rain to the deepest layers of human survival. The leading hypothesis, supported by the geographic distribution of geosmin sensitivity across human populations and its near-universal presence across cultures that have never had contact with each other, is that the smell of geosmin was, for most of human evolutionary history, one of the most important signals a person could receive. It meant rain was coming. It meant water was available. It meant the drought was breaking. It meant the plants would grow and the animals would return to the water sources, and the immediate threat of thirst and starvation was receding. The smell of rain is the oldest good news, and your nervous system still treats it that way. The neurological response to petrichor, the specific activation pattern in the limbic system, the brain's emotional and memory processing center, that the smell of rain produces, is consistent across subjects with a response that researchers describe as simultaneously calming and alerting. Calming because the signal means safety, means water, means the world is providing. Alerting because the signal means something is about to happen, The rain is coming, pay attention, this matters. Your body hears petrichor as both a lullaby and an announcement. But geosmin is only the first layer of petrichor's chemistry. The second layer comes from the plants. During dry periods, plants produce and secrete oils from their surfaces, waxy, aromatic compounds that accumulate on leaves and stems and in the soil, and that are released in quantity when rain arrives and the water disturbs the surface where they have been collecting. These plant oils mix with the geosmin from the bacteria and with ozone produced by lightning in approaching storms. Ozone has its own sharp, clean, electric smell, the smell most people associate with the air just before a thunderstorm, and the result is the full complex signal of petrichor that the human nose receives and the human nervous system interprets as rain. 3 separate biological and chemical systems, soil bacteria, plant surfaces, atmospheric electricity, combining their signals into a single smell that arrives in your nose and produces, within seconds, a neurological response that 4 billion years of life on a rain-fed planet has tuned to interpret as safety. The smell of rain is a message from the living world to your nervous system. It says, the water is here. Everything is going to continue. Now consider what happens when the rain actually arrives, not to the chemistry of the air, but to the biology of the soil below. A single raindrop strikes the surface of dry soil, and the impact alone, the mechanical shock of that 32 km/h collision, is enough to release a puff of soil particles and trapped air into the atmosphere above the impact point, visible in high-speed photography as a tiny explosion of dust and droplets rising from the point of contact. But inside that puff of ejected material, carried upward on the aerosol of the splash, are bacteria, specifically actinomycetes, the same geosmin-producing bacteria whose metabolic byproducts announced the rain's arrival before the first drop fell. The rain picks them up, carries them into the air, disperses them across the landscape in the aerosol of its own splashing. Rain spreads the bacteria that produce its own smell. The organism that announces the rain's arrival is distributed across the landscape by the rain itself, seeding new soil with the bacteria that will produce geosmin for the next drought, that will release petrichor for the next approaching storm, that will wake the next generation of sleepers with the ancient smell of water coming. The rain and the bacteria have been in this relationship for so long, the rain distributing the bacteria welcoming the rain, that it is impossible to say which one shaped the other more completely. They are a system, an ancient, self-reinforcing, mutually dependent system that has been running since before the first plant grew on land. 470 million years of rain distributing bacteria that welcome rain. Beneath the surface, the arrival of rain does something more dramatic still. Dry soil is, in biological terms, a waiting room. The organisms living in dry soil are not dead. They are dormant, their metabolisms reduced to the minimum necessary to maintain cellular integrity, their activity suspended, their consumption of resources dropped to near zero, waiting in a state that is not quite life and not quite death for the chemical signal that will end the waiting. That signal is water. When rain soaks into the soil and the moisture content rises past a threshold that different organisms hit at different moisture levels, so the awakening is staggered, not simultaneous. The dormant organisms activate. Bacteria that have been sitting in suspended animation for months resume their metabolism within minutes of the moisture arriving. Fungi that have been maintaining only their most critical cellular functions extend new hyphae into the newly wet soil within hours. Nematodes, microscopic roundworms that survive drought by entering a state called cryptobiosis, in which they lose almost all of their body water and exist in a state of suspended animation that can last for decades, rehydrate and resume movement within hours of the moisture arriving. Cryptobiosis. Hidden life. A nematode in cryptobiosis has reduced its body water content to less than 1% of its normal level. It has rolled into a tight ball. Its metabolism has dropped to less than 1/10,000th of its active rate. It is not consuming, not moving, not aging in any meaningful biological sense. It is simply waiting, in a state so reduced that it can survive temperatures from nearly absolute zero to above the boiling point of water, survive pressures that would crush most organisms, survive radiation levels that would kill most life forms on Earth. And then the rain comes. And within hours, the nematode unfurls, rehydrates, resumes movement, begins feeding, begins reproducing, begins participating in the soil food web, grazing on bacteria, being eaten by larger organisms, cycling nutrients through the system, doing the work that soil organisms do, the work that makes plant growth possible, the work that ultimately makes your food possible. The rain wakes the dead, not metaphorically, biologically. Organisms that were in a state so reduced that no measurable metabolism was occurring, that could survive conditions lethal to almost every other living thing, resume full biological activity within hours of the moisture arriving. The soil is not just a substrate for life. It is an archive of dormant life, waiting for rain, capable of resuming function across time frames that make human patience look brief. Detectives looking at soil samples taken from ancient lake beds revealed viable bacteria in layers of sediment dated to more than 100 million years old. Bacteria that had been dormant since the Cretaceous period, since the time of the dinosaurs, preserved in dry sediment through 100 million years of geological time, and that resumed metabolic activity when exposed to moisture and nutrients in the laboratory. 100 million years of waiting, ended by water. The patience of the dormant soil is the patience of deep time made biological. And what those awakened organisms do, what all the bacteria and fungi and nematodes and mites and springtails and earthworms and beetles and every other member of the soil food web does in the hours and days after rain, is build. They break down organic material. They release nutrients. They form the stable soil aggregates that give healthy soil its structure. The crumb structure that allows water to infiltrate without washing the soil away, that allows air to reach plant roots, that allows the entire above-ground ecosystem to exist on a foundation that holds together under the pressure of growth. Healthy soil smells of geosmin. It smells, in other words, of rain. Not because rain just fell, because the bacteria that produce geosmin are thriving, which means the soil is alive, which means the nutrients are cycling, which means the plants are fed, which means the food web is functioning, which means the ecosystem is in the condition that produces the smell that tells you, in a signal older than language, that everything is all right. When you smell rain, you are smelling a healthy world. Your body has always known this. Long before you had words for it. Long before you knew what geosmin was, or what actinomycetes were, or what petrichor meant, or that the smell was produced by bacteria rather than by the rain itself. Your nervous system knew, because it was built by evolution in a world where the smell of rain meant survival, that the smell of rain was good, was safe, was the world working correctly. You were built to find this smell calming, because it is the smell of the world being alive. And the world is alive right now. Outside whatever window you are nearest to, the soil is doing its work. Bacteria processing, fungi extending, roots drinking, the whole patient system cycling nutrients and water and carbon and energy through a web of relationships so dense and so ancient that every rain that falls participates in it, and every organism that drinks the rain carries it forward, and every breath that rises from the soil into the air above carries, at concentrations your nose can detect even when your mind has. Stop trying. The message that has been rising from the ground since the first rain fell on the first soil on the first continent 4 billion years ago. The water is here. Everything is going to continue. Your breathing is slower now than when we began. The thoughts that were crowding the surface of your mind when this started have settled. Not gone, just lower, quieter, the way rain settles into soil rather than pooling at the surface. The soil receives the rain without drama, without resistance. It simply allows the water to enter, to move downward through the layers, to reach the places where it is needed. You can do the same. Allow what is moving through you tonight, the thoughts, the weight of the day, the residue of whatever occupied your mind before you came here, to settle, to move downward. to find its own level in the quiet below the surface, where the deeper processes continue without requiring your attention or your management. The rain knows how to do this. It has been doing it for 4 billion years. And tonight, it is doing it for you. The same rain that wakes the soil destroys the mountain. Not immediately. Not in any way that a single human lifetime could observe without instruments. But the rain that soaks into the soil tonight and activates the dormant bacteria and carries geosmin into the air and produces the smell that your nervous system interprets as safety, that same rain is dissolving the rock beneath the soil, is widening the fractures in the bedrock, is carrying mineral material in solution toward the nearest river, is doing, grain by grain and molecule by molecule, the same work it has always done, the work of reducing whatever stands above sea level to the level of the sea. Rain does not distinguish between what it builds and what it destroys. It simply works. The scale of what rain has destroyed is, once you encounter it directly, one of the most disorienting facts in the natural world. Not because it is alarming. It is not, in the end, alarming at all, for reasons we will arrive at, but because it requires the mind to hold two contradictory images simultaneously. The gentle rain, the destroyed mountain, the smell of petrichor, the vanished continent, the drop that lands softly on your skin, the force that has removed more material from the surface of the earth than every earthquake and every volcanic eruption and every tectonic collision in the history of the planet combined. Rain is the largest demolition force on the surface of the earth. Not volcanoes, not earthquakes, not glaciers, though glaciers are formidable. Rain, the patient, continuous, chemically active, mechanically persistent fall of water from cloud to ground, repeated across every surface the atmosphere can reach, every day, for 4 billion years, has moved more rock and more mineral material from higher ground to lower ground than any other single process in the geological record. The Himalayas are being dissolved by rain right now. The highest mountain range on Earth, the range that contains the 10 highest peaks in the world, including Everest at 8,849 meters, the highest point on the planet's surface, is being chemically attacked and mechanically eroded by rain every moment that rain falls on its slopes. The Ganges River, which drains the southern face of the Himalayas and carries their eroded material across the Indian subcontinent to the Bay of Bengal, transports approximately 1 billion tons of sediment per year. 1 billion tons. Every year. Dissolved and suspended Himalayan rock, carried by the rain that fell on the mountains and ran off into rivers and eventually reached the ocean. 1 billion tons per year. If you loaded that material onto standard freight trucks, the kind you see on highways, carrying 40 tons, you would need 25 million truck journeys per year to move the same volume of rock that the rain and the rivers move silently, invisibly, without machinery or fuel, simply by the chemistry of water dissolving stone and the physics of rivers carrying the dissolved material downhill. 25 million truck journeys per year from one mountain range. And the Himalayas are still rising, pushed upward by the collision of the Indian plate into the Eurasian plate at approximately 5 centimeters per year, fast enough, barely, to keep pace with the rain's demolition. The mountains exist in a state of dynamic tension between the tectonic force pushing them upward and the rain pulling them down, grain by grain, into the ocean. Remove the rain, and the Himalayas would grow taller. Remove the tectonic collision, and the rain would reduce them to a flat plain within, in geological terms, a relatively short period. The mountains exist because the rain has not yet finished with them. But the geological demolition of mountain ranges, while it operates at a scale that the mind can barely hold, is slow enough to be invisible on any human timescale. The catastrophe of rain that human history has actually witnessed, the rain events that changed the course of civilizations, that moved populations, that carved landscapes in years rather than millions of years, operates at a different scale. More compressed, more immediate, more legible to the human mind because it happened within human memory, sometimes within living memory, sometimes within the memory of people who are still alive tonight, lying in their own beds in their own darkness, carrying their own version of the rain's history in their bodies. The monsoon is the largest weather system on Earth. Not the largest storm. Not the largest individual rainfall event. The largest sustained weather system. A seasonal reversal of atmospheric circulation driven by the differential heating of land and ocean, producing rainfall on a scale that no other weather phenomenon approaches, and that no other single climatic event more directly shapes the lives of more human beings. The Asian monsoon, the seasonal rainfall system that affects South Asia, Southeast Asia, East Asia, and parts of Africa, delivers water to approximately half the world's population. 3.5 billion people. Their agriculture, their water supply, their food security, their economies, and in many cases their immediate physical survival depend on the monsoon arriving on schedule, depositing approximately the right amount of rain in approximately the right places, and then retreating on schedule to allow the harvest. When it does not arrive on schedule, people die. Detectives looking at the historical record of monsoon failures and their human consequences revealed a pattern that runs through Asian history like a dark thread, a recurring catastrophe that has reshaped empires, triggered famines, driven migrations, and contributed to the collapse of civilizations across thousands of years of recorded history. The drought years, the years when the monsoon was weak, when the rain that 3.5 billion people depended on arrived late or failed entirely or deposited a fraction of its normal volume, produced consequences that unfolded in a sequence as predictable as the monsoon itself. The crops failed. The rivers dropped. The reservoirs emptied. The grain stores ran out. And then the people moved, away from the dry land toward wherever water remained, in migrations that could involve millions of people simultaneously, covering hundreds of kilometers on foot, arriving in regions that had their own people and their own strained resources and their own relationship with the same failed rain. The largest famine in recorded human history was caused by rain, specifically by its absence. The Great Chinese Famine of 1959 to 1961, while significantly worsened by policy failures, was triggered in part by widespread drought, the failure of the monsoon rains across large parts of China simultaneously, producing crop failures on a scale that the country's agricultural system could not absorb. Between 15 and 45 million people died, depending on which estimates are accepted. The uncertainty in that number, the fact that the death toll of the largest famine in human history cannot be established more precisely than a range of 30 million, is itself a record of how completely the catastrophe overwhelmed the capacity to count. 30 million people, the population of a large country, gone in 3 years, because the rain did not come. And when the rain comes too much, when the monsoon delivers not a failure but an excess, when the rain that was supposed to distribute itself across a season arrives instead in days or hours, the catastrophe runs in the other direction with equal force. The largest flood in recorded human history occurred in China. The 1931 Central China floods, produced by an exceptionally strong monsoon that followed 2 years of drought, dropping on dry ground that had lost its capacity to absorb water, into river systems already stressed by snowmelt from an unusually heavy winter, killed between 1 and 4 million people. The Yangtze River, the Huai River, and the Yellow River all flooded simultaneously. The floodwaters covered an area of approximately 90,000 square kilometers, roughly the size of Portugal, to depths that in some places exceeded several meters. The city of Wuhan was submerged. The city of Nanjing was partially inundated. Millions of people were displaced into temporary shelters where disease, cholera, typhoid, dysentery, killed as many as the water itself. 90,000 square kilometers of water. From rain. Your body processes approximately 2 liters of water per day under normal conditions. Drinking, eating, absorbing moisture from the air. 2 liters. In the weeks of the 1931 floods, the rivers of central China were carrying approximately 60,000 cubic meters of water per second past the flood gauges at their peak. 60,000 cubic meters per second. 1 cubic meter of water weighs 1 ton. The rivers were moving 60,000 tons of water past a single point every second at their peak. The rain that falls gently enough to sleep to is the same water. the same physics, the same molecule, the same 4 billion-year-old cycle, operating at a different point on the scale between the drop that lands on your skin and the flood that submerges a country. The difference between them is not a difference in kind. It is a difference in quantity and timing, in how much water the atmosphere delivers, and how quickly, and onto what kind of ground, and into what kind of river system, and in what season, and following what prior weather. Rain is not gentle or violent by nature. It is simply water, falling, doing what gravity and physics require. The gentleness or the violence is a product of the interaction between the water and the landscape it falls on. A landscape that the same rain has been shaping for millions of years, carving the channels that will either receive the water or overflow with it, building the soil that will either absorb it or shed it, determining whether the rain becomes the petrichor smell of a waking garden or the brown wall of a flood advancing across a plain. Detectives looking at the sediment record of ancient floods revealed something that reframes the catastrophe in a way that, late at night, with the day already far behind you and your breathing already slower than it was, has a particular quality of comfort to it. The floods left their record in the sediment. Each flood, each extraordinary rainfall event that exceeded the capacity of the landscape to absorb and channel the water, deposited a layer of distinctive flood sediment in the geological record. A dark band of fine material, rich in organic content, marking the moment when the river overflowed its banks and spread across the floodplain and deposited everything it was carrying. Those flood sediment layers are among the most fertile soils on Earth. The Nile floods, the annual inundation of the Nile Valley that Egyptian civilization depended on for 3,000 years, that the entire agricultural system of ancient Egypt was designed around, that the Egyptian calendar was structured to predict and celebrate, deposited a layer of rich black silt across the floodplain every year. The silt was the Nile's gift. The material it had carried from the highlands of Ethiopia and Sudan, dissolved and suspended by the monsoon rains on those distant mountains, transported thousands of kilometers downstream, and deposited on the Egyptian floodplain when the river slowed and the water spread and the sediment settled. The flood was the fertilizer. The catastrophe was the gift. The ancient Egyptians understood this in a way that modern flood management sometimes obscures. They did not try to prevent the Nile's annual flood. They planned for it. They built their cities above the flood line and their fields below it. They read the flood gauges, the Nilometers, carved stone measuring devices set into the riverbed at strategic points along the Nile, some of them still standing, to predict whether the flood would be high enough to fertilize the fields without being high enough to destroy the villages. They calibrated their entire civilization to the rhythm of a rainfall event happening thousands of kilometers away on the mountains of Ethiopia. Rain they never saw, falling on land most of them never visited, producing a flood that arrived in Egypt weeks later like a slow, brown, life-giving pulse. The rain on Ethiopian mountains built Egyptian civilization. And when the rains failed, when the Ethiopian monsoon was weak and the Nile flood was low and the silt did not reach the fields, Egypt faltered. The historical record is explicit about this. The periods of political instability, famine, and social collapse in ancient Egyptian history correlate with the periods identified in the sediment record as low flood years, years when the rain that was supposed to fall on Ethiopian mountains did not fall, and the Nile did not rise, and the fields were not fertilized, and the harvest failed. 3,000 years of one of the most stable civilizations in human history, built on the schedule of rain falling on mountains in a different country. Your own existence, the specific food system that fed you today, the agriculture that produced whatever you ate, the water infrastructure that delivered whatever you drank, is similarly dependent on rain falling in specific places at specific times in specific quantities. The wheat that made your bread grew in fields watered by rain or by rivers fed by rain. The vegetables that fed you were grown in soil built by rain over thousands of years. The water in your glass came from a reservoir filled by rain or a river fed by rain or a groundwater system recharged by rain. You are, tonight, the beneficiary of rain that fell in the right places at the right times, as you have been every day of your life. And the catastrophe, the flood, the famine, the monsoon failure, the mountain dissolved into the sea, is not separate from the gift. It is the same system, the same rain, operating at the same scale it has always operated, producing sometimes the gentle fall that wakes the soil and fills the river and smells of petrichor and lets you sleep, and sometimes the excess that overwhelms the landscape and rewrites the geography and deposits the fertile silt that feeds the next civilization. The rain does not know the difference. It simply falls, where the atmosphere sends it, in the quantities the physics allow, on the landscape that the same rain has been shaping for 4 billion years, carving the channels and building the soil and filling the aquifers that will either receive the next rain gently or be overwhelmed by it, depending on how much comes, and how fast, and what the ground is like when it arrives. This is the rule the catastrophe teaches. Not that rain is dangerous, though it can be, enormously, historically, civilization-endingly dangerous. But that rain is indifferent. It is not trying to help or to harm. It is simply the consequence of water existing on a planet with an atmosphere and a sun and gravity. It does what physics requires. And what physics requires, across 4 billion years of rainfall on a planet full of living things, has produced a world so dense with life and fertility and biological complexity that the catastrophe and the gift are inseparable. You cannot have the petrichor without the flood. You cannot have the fertile silt without the river that flooded. You cannot have the soil without the rain that dissolved the rock. You cannot have the rain without the ocean. You cannot have the ocean without the 40,000 years of rain that built it. The catastrophe is the foundation. It always has been. And tonight, wherever the rain is falling, on mountains it is dissolving, on rivers it is filling, on soil it is waking, on cities it is testing, on oceans it is replenishing. It is doing exactly what it has always done. What it will always do. Moving water from where there is too much of it to where there is not enough. Reshaping the landscape one grain at a time. Building the conditions for the next growth, the next harvest, the next civilization, the next quiet night where someone lies still in the dark and listens to rain on a roof and feels, without quite knowing why, that everything is going to be all right. The rain that falls tonight is the same rain, the same water, the same cycle, the same patient, indifferent, 4-billion-year-old process that dissolved the mountains and built the oceans and fertilized the fields and woke the sleeping soil and produced the smell that your nervous system still reads as safety. Let that settle now, not as a thought to hold tightly, as something to release into, the way rain releases into soil, without resistance, without pooling at the surface, simply allowing the weight of it to move downward, into the quiet below, where the deeper processes continue without your supervision. The rain knows what it is doing. It has always known. There is rain in you right now. Not the memory of rain. Not a poetic approximation of rain. Actual rain. Actual water that fell from an actual cloud onto an actual landscape at some point in the last several weeks or months, that soaked into the soil or ran into a river or was absorbed by a plant root and carried upward through a stem and released from a leaf as vapor and evaporated back into the atmosphere and eventually found its way into the food or the drink that became part of you. Water that was rain. That is now blood. That is now the fluid in your joints and the moisture on the surface of your eyes and the water in the cells of your brain that are, at this moment, processing these words and finding them, perhaps, a reason to finally stop processing anything at all. The rain did not stop when it hit the ground. It continued, as it always continues, through the soil and the plant and the food chain and the water table and the river and the reservoir and the pipe and the glass and you. One continuous movement of water from the cloud to the ground to the living world to your body. The same movement that has been occurring without interruption since the first rain fell on the first ocean 4 billion years ago. The same movement that built the oceans and dissolved the mountains and fertilized the fields and woke the sleeping soil and produced the smell that your nervous system reads as safety. You are not at the end of that movement. You are in the middle of it. The water in your body right now is passing through you the way rain passes through soil, entering, moving through the system, doing its work, and eventually leaving to continue the cycle. Every day, your body processes and replaces approximately 2.5 liters of water. Water lost through breath and sweat and the ordinary biological processes of a living body, replaced by the water in everything you eat and drink. 2.5 liters per day. The water that is in you tonight will mostly be gone within 2 to 3 weeks. Return to the environment through your breath and your body, entering the atmosphere as vapor, rising on warm air currents, cooling to its dew point, condensing around a particle of dust or sea salt, becoming cloud, becoming rain. The water you exhaled tonight is already in the atmosphere above you, already cooling, already beginning the process of finding a particle to condense around. It will become a cloud droplet before morning. It may become rain before the week is out, falling on a garden or a river or a field or the surface of the ocean, somewhere you will never see, contributing its small precise fraction of moisture to a landscape that needs it. Your breath is building tomorrow's rain. Detectives looking at the isotopic signature of water vapor in the atmosphere above major cities revealed that a measurable fraction of the atmospheric moisture over any populated area comes directly from the breath and perspiration of the people living there. The water vapor exhaled by the population of a city contributes to the local humidity, contributes to the conditions that produce local cloud formation, contributes, in its infinitesimal and unmeasurable at the individual level way, to the rain that falls on that city and its surroundings. The people make the rain, not intentionally, not in any amount that an individual could detect or take credit for. But the water cycle does not distinguish between the vapor that evaporated from the ocean and the vapor that came from a human lung. It takes what the atmosphere offers and builds what the physics allow. And part of what the atmosphere offers, in any place where living things breathe and transpire and release their water back into the air, is the moisture of living bodies, the water that was rain, that passed through life, that is rain again. You have always been part of the water cycle. From your first breath to your last, every molecule of water that passes through your body enters the cycle that has been running since before life existed on this planet. You did not join the water cycle when you were born. You were assembled from it, built from water that was already ancient when the first human being drew breath, water that had been through the cycle an uncountable number of times before it arrived in you, water that will continue through the cycle an uncountable number of times after you return it. The water is 4 billion years old. You are the most recent thing it has been. Hold that thought for a moment, not as something to analyze, but as something to feel. The water in your body is 4 billion years old. It has been part of this planet since before the first cell divided in the warm shallows of the early ocean. It has been part of the rain that built the oceans, part of the ancient downpour that dissolved the first rock into the first soil, part of the rain that fell on landscapes that no longer exist, on mountains that have been dissolved into the sea, on forests that grew and died and became the coal that became the carbon that became the carbon dioxide that became the carbonic acid in the next rain that dissolved the next mountain. It has been everywhere this planet has water. And right now, tonight, it is here, in you, resting, moving through your cells in the slow, patient rhythm of a body at rest, not the urgent circulation of exertion, not the rapid processing of digestion, but the quiet, maintenance-level movement of water through a system that is down-regulated for the night, that is doing only what is necessary, that is, in the most biological sense of the word, settling. Detectives looking at what happens to water in the body during sleep revealed something that connects the rain outside to the rain inside in a way that is both scientifically precise and, at this hour, quietly beautiful. During sleep, the brain's glymphatic system, a network of channels surrounding the brain's blood vessels that functions as the brain's waste clearance system, becomes significantly more active than during waking hours. The channels widen. Cerebrospinal fluid, which is approximately 99% water, flows through them at an increased rate, flushing out the metabolic waste products that accumulate during the brain's waking activity. The proteins and toxins and cellular debris that build up during a day of thinking and feeling and processing and deciding are cleared away by water. by the flow of cerebrospinal fluid through the brain's own internal drainage system. Your brain cleans itself with water while you sleep. The rain outside falls through the landscape, dissolving and carrying and depositing. The water inside you flows through your brain, dissolving and carrying and depositing. The same chemistry, the same patient mechanism of water moving through a system and carrying with it whatever the system needs to release. Outside, mineral sediment, organic material, the products of geological and biological processes. Inside, the metabolic waste of consciousness, the biochemical residue of a day's worth of thought, cleared away by the flow of water through channels that widen specifically for this purpose, specifically during sleep. Rain cleans the landscape. Water cleans your brain. Both happen most effectively when everything is still. This is why the sound of rain is not just calming by association, or by learned response, or by the evolutionary signal of safety that petrichor carries. The sound of rain is calming because rain and sleep share the same logic. Both are cleaning operations. Both require stillness to work. Both move water through a system to carry away what has accumulated and needs to be released. When you hear rain and feel your body relax, you are responding to a sound that carries, below its surface, a logic your biology recognizes. The logic of water doing its patient work. The logic of something being cleaned. The logic of the system resetting itself, quietly, in the dark, without requiring anything from you except the willingness to be still. You have always known how to do this. Your body has been doing it every night of your life, clearing the residue of the day with the same water that the rain uses to clear the residue of the landscape, flushing the system, resetting the chemistry, preparing the ground for what comes next. The same patient, unhurried, water-driven process of renewal that has been running in the living world since the first rain fell on the first soil and woke the first dormant bacteria and began the first water cycle that would eventually, across 4 billion years of unbroken continuation, produce the conditions in which you could exist. And every night, while you sleep, your brain participates in that cycle, becomes, for a few hours, a landscape that water moves through, becomes, briefly, rain country. You have been the beneficiary of rain every day of your life. In the food it grew, in the water it delivered, in the air it cleaned, in the soil it built, in the rivers it filled, in the smell it produced that told your nervous system, before you were old enough to understand why, that the world was providing and everything was going to be all right. And you have been the beneficiary of the rain inside you every night of your life. In the sleep that the water in your brain made possible, in the clearing of the day's residue that the glymphatic flow achieved while you were unconscious, in the waking each morning slightly lighter than you went to sleep, the biochemical weight of yesterday dissolved and carried away by the patient movement of water through a system that knows, without being told, exactly what it is doing. The rain outside and the water inside have always been working together. Tonight is no different. If this journey has been useful to you, if this slow hour of rain and deep time and the patient logic of water has helped the weight of today settle into something you can finally release, then I would gently invite you to subscribe, or to leave a thought below about whichever part of this stayed with you longest. It helps other people who are lying in their own darkness, also trying to let the day dissolve the way rain dissolves into soil, find their way here, one drop at a time. And if sleep is still arriving slowly, if there is still some part of today that has not yet released its hold, there is another journey waiting, another piece of the natural world, another deep time story told at this same pace, in this same voice, ready to carry you somewhere ancient and patient and larger than whatever is still asking for your attention. It will be there when you need it. But for now, feel the weight of your body where it meets the surface beneath you. Notice how the surface receives that weight, completely, without adjustment, without effort, the way soil receives rain. Not resisting it, not redirecting it, simply allowing it to settle, to move downward, to find its own level in the quiet below. Your brain is already beginning its nightly work, already widening the channels, already moving the water through, already clearing what the day left behind, molecule by molecule, in the slow and patient way that water always does its work. Not quickly, not dramatically, but continuously and completely, leaving the system cleaner than it found it, ready for what comes next. You do not need to help it. You only need to be still. The rain outside is falling somewhere tonight. On mountains it is slowly dissolving. On rivers it is quietly filling. On soil it is gently waking. On the surface of the ocean it is returning, drop by drop, to the body of water it came from, completing the cycle, as it always completes the cycle, as it has completed the cycle every day for 4 billion years without a single interruption. The water in you is doing the same. Returning, completing, settling. Allow your shoulders to soften now. The way clouds soften at their edges when the updraft slows, not disappearing, just releasing the shape they held, becoming lighter, less defined, dissolving back into something that does not need to hold itself together. Allow your jaw to unclench. Allow your hands to open. Allow the thoughts that are still moving at the surface of your mind to do what rain always does when it meets still water, to settle, to stop moving, to become part of the surface rather than something disturbing it. Your breathing is already slower than it was when we began. The day is already further away. The water in your brain is already moving through its channels, already clearing the residue, already preparing the ground for sleep the way rain prepares the soil for growth. Patiently, without drama, knowing exactly what it is doing and needing nothing from you except stillness. Give it stillness. The rain knows how to do the rest. It has been doing it for 4 billion years. 4 billion years of rain falling on a planet, building its oceans, dissolving its mountains, waking its soil, feeding its civilizations, moving through its living things, cleaning its landscapes, returning to its clouds, falling again, always falling, always returning, always, in the end, finding its way back to the ground. Let yourself be the ground tonight. Let the water settle into you. Let the weight of the day dissolve the way mineral weight dissolves in rain. Slowly, completely, without effort, without resistance, carried away by something patient and ancient and larger than anything that happened today. Nothing needs solving tonight. Nothing needs remembering. The rain is falling somewhere. The water is moving. The cycle is continuing, as it has always continued, as it will always continue, long after tonight and long after you and long after everything that felt urgent today has dissolved back into the 4 billion year flow of water through a world that has never once stopped receiving it. You are part of that flow. You always have been. Rest now. Let the rain do what it has always done. Sleep well, and good night.